Hello and welcome back to Afterglow, episode 25. Kind of a milestone episode. We are a quarter of the way to 100 episodes. And that's all thanks to people like you right now who are taking time out of your day to listen to my ramblings and memories about all these old video games. I just want to know that I really do appreciate that this show would not be here without you guys being interested in listening, and I do appreciate it a lot. So today we're going to be talking about Donkey Kong Country. This game is really known for revitalizing the Super Nintendo and giving it one final hard push after it met up with stiff competition from next generation consoles. And as far as I'm concerned, I like it. It's not a game that I'm crazy about, but it's not a trash game either. I enjoy it and think it's a good game. Which is kind of funny because a lot of people either really, really love it, or there is a very vocal minority that are like, oh, the gameplay's not that good and it's just a graphical powerhouse. I'm more or less in neither camp. I just think it's a good, solid game. I don't think it's spectacular, but I don't think it's awful either. But that's enough of my intro rambling. Let's cut to some music, and then whenever we're back, I'll start giving my thoughts on Donkey Kong Country. All right, welcome back. So, my personal memories on Donkey Kong Country, I can tell you before this game came out, it was hyped to no end. Nintendo was pushing hard that they had these Silicon, I can't remember the name of the company, it was Silicon something, but that they did the graphics for the game, or they used the computers to do the graphics for the game, and It was next generation without being a next generation console. Like Nintendo Power was pushing it really hard, and even the third-party magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly, I remember them pushing it real hard. So the game came out, and I had rented it, and I had gotten to the ice levels of it, and I thought it was fun. I didn't think it was anything really revolutionary. I thought it was a simpler game than, let's say, Super Mario World, even the original launch title for the Super Nintendo. I thought it was a bit simpler as far as gameplay. Of course, graphically, it's a bit different, but I'm going to go into the graphics in a minute. But I don't think the graphics are as revolutionary as what everyone made them out to be. I think it was just a new way to put graphics on the Nintendo that looked different and not exactly more powerful. But, gonna move on from that. I rented it, got to the ice levels, didn't really feel a need to rent it again. But the hoopla was wild for this game after it came out, too. And eventually, my aunt and uncle got a Super Nintendo, and Donkey Kong Country was the pack-in game instead of Super Mario World. Of course, whenever I got my Super Nintendo, I actually got the model that did not have a pack-in game. But at this point, you could almost get a copy of Super Mario World from a buddy for like $1 or two just because they didn't care. So I did get my copy of Mario World eventually. But going back to Donkey Kong Country, they got it, and because it was the pack-in for their system, they didn't get any other games. If I was out there, I would play Donkey Kong Country, and I got really, really good at this game because, again, if I'm at my aunt and uncle's and there's nothing else to play, I'm going to play Donkey Kong. I mean, I'd bring over a couple of my cartridges too, but for the most part, I would play Donkey Kong Country just because it was different. You know, I've already played my games to death, so I'm going to play something different. And there is a bit of a difficulty spike whenever you get to the ice level, and then again whenever you get to the cave area. But I still really enjoyed it. A quick funny aside, and spoiler alert if you've never beat Donkey Kong Country, whenever you get to the final boss, King K. Rool, you think you beat him, and then the music changes and it gets back up, and the boss fight starts again with him having a completely different, unique pattern. It got me the first time. I had set the controller down, I was watching the television, and he got back up, and I had to lunge for the controller in order to get back into it, and it cost me a few more lives, but I did eventually beat him. But I do remember I had a lot of fun with it. And there were even times to where me and my aunt and uncle would do a game swap where I would take home Donkey Kong Country for a couple weeks, and they would keep one of my games for a couple weeks. But going into the graphics, like everyone was going nuts over the graphics at the time, and like today, I think it's really obvious what they did. It might not have been as obvious back then because, of course, their televisions were not as high of a resolution as what we have now. But it's obvious that they took the sprite, it wasn't a sprite, it was a 3D model created. They took one facing of this 3D model and they turned it into a sprite and they downscaled it. That way the Super Nintendo could process that image. It's not a true 3D image by any means. It is one viewpoint of a 3D image that they've taken a picture of. And then they scale down the resolution, that way the Super Nintendo can process it. To me, it's almost similar to the technology that they used whenever they did Mortal Kombat. Where, a person, of course, it exists in 3D, but in Mortal Kombat, what they do, they call it digitizing. They take a picture of it, and they downscale the resolution to turn it into a bunch of pixels for a sprite. And to me, they did the same thing with Donkey Kong Country, and it was a really good idea and gave the game a unique look. But I don't feel like it was like pushing the power of the Super Nintendo any differently than any other game at the time. To be honest, I think that a game like Star Fox, even though it ran at a slower speed, pushed the power of the Super Nintendo a lot more than Donkey Kong Country, because it's actually having to push actual 3D models. Whereas Donkey Kong Country, to me, it definitely looks like a one dimension or a two-dimensional scan of a 3D model. And that's what I kind of thought back then too. And then as time went on, and you could play the game on higher resolution screens, like the Super Nintendo Classic is a great example of this. It's definitely obvious what they did if you look at some of the advertisements for the game that had the full resolution 3D model versus what you got in the game. I mean, to me, it's like, okay, they took that model and they literally dropped the resolution and pixelized it. But I had fun with it. I enjoyed it enough to where I did go ahead and rent Donkey Kong Country 2 and Donkey Kong Country 3 as well. And I enjoyed it enough to where I did emulate those games later on in life, and I repurchased all three. Well, I say purchase them for the first time whenever I started collecting for the Super Nintendo. But yeah, I think it's a fun game, but I don't think it's revolutionary like everyone else. Well, I claim everyone else, but like a lot of people sometimes claim it is. But it's not a bad game by any means. I enjoy it. But that's going to close out this episode of Afterglow. Not a lot of thoughts on Donkey Kong Country, other than the fact that it's a good game. I it was Nintendo's final foray and final push for the Super Nintendo before the N64 came out. And again, I wouldn't call it a bad game by any means, but I wouldn't call it revolutionary either. But thanks for listening to my rambling about Donkey Kong Country and a few memories about it. Like I said, I played the others in the Super Nintendo. I did not play the ones on the N64. I think I might have played the Tropical Freeze one that came out for Switch. I thought it was okay too. Same thing. It's a fun game. It's not revolutionary. I don't hold it as high as I would hold any Mario platformer. But that's going to close this episode of Afterglow. Thank you again for listening to my ramblings. We're going to close this out to what I feel, and to what most people feel, is the best music track off Donkey Kong Country. So enjoy, and I'll see you next time on Afterglow.